Jai Bhim, Salam, Namaskar to this wonderful event. It is my honor and privilege to be welcoming Mr. Rahul Gandhi, who of course needs no invitation. I wanted to say Rahul and Anjali, kuch kuch hota hai. I think this is on, so I'm a good Bombay person. I need a joke to lighten things up. So Mr. Gandhi, as I said, needs very little introduction. Our small center and robust center does. I represent the Center for South Asian Studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz. We are a public university, unlike our neighbor next door, hint, hint. We are committed to conversations between the community and our scholarly publics. We believe in creating dialogue, sanctuary, and that is why our center is focused on questions of justice. And the invitation that Mr. Gandhi so generously has accepted extends our vision of justice, as it is a unique opportunity to think together about the perils and possibilities of democratic futures in an increasingly divided and authoritarian India. And of course, Mr. Rahul Gandhi's recent Jodo Yatra, which we will talk about, has been an enormous source of inspiration. We have moved from a politics of disenchantment to a politics of engagement. So I thank you. Now, before I have the task of hosting the conversation, I just wanted to say a big shukriya to our trustees and our supporters, Anuradha Mathur, Thomas Kailat, Arjun and Kiran Malhotra, and Talat and Kamil Hassan. Without you, our event and our center would not have been possible. So, shuruaat kare. So, Mr. Gandhi, first, I want to invite you to just say a few words about your vision, your ambitions, your expectations for being here in the diaspora at such a critical moment I think, in Indian history. I'm a historian, so I'm always interested in the past and the future. I wanted you to sort of open, if you will, with your vision of what this meeting, this trip is about, especially since we are still riding the euphoria of the Karnataka elections. I'm from Hubli, my mother's from Hubli, so Karnataka is very special to me. And of course, the magnificent Jodo Yatra. But we must also, as you know, couple it with what is happening right as we speak at the Parliament House opening and the protests of my Bahujan female wrestlers who are fighting for the right to be represented and to get justice against sexual violence. So it's a very complicated time. So we'd love to hear your vision about why you're here, what you would like for us to do, what are your expectations? So whatever you fancy, I know it's a big question.
Well, thank you everybody for coming here. I just landed this morning, so I might be a little jet lagged, but so pardon me that. It's Sam's fault. I think what we were finding back home was that the tools that were available to us in politics some years ago were no longer available to us. And we were struggling with this idea. How do you in the 21st century operate in India without political instruments? People think politics is just about politicians talking. There is a whole infrastructure that supports the politics. Institutional infrastructure, the press, the judiciary, just the idea that people feel they can express themselves. And it's clear to everybody that those were under pressure, those were under attack. So we were struggling with this idea because we found that the normal politics, I mean, in my case, the politics that worked just fine until 2014, just wouldn't work. And it wouldn't work because no matter what you tried to say, it would be distorted, it would be reshaped, it would be carried in a completely different way. And then we struck upon the simplest thing, which I'm quite amazed that we didn't strike upon it earlier, which was that the simple answer to this is to walk. And it was something that, this might sound strange to you, but it was unbelievably profound. Because the moment we started to walk, we started to discover a completely different India, a completely different conversation that is going on. And I myself was completely shocked at the distortion that was being transmitted. So India is speaking one language, India is behaving in one way, and if you listen to the media, if you listen to the discourse, it's just something completely different. So it was almost, to me, it was a massive shock. That I actually, in the first month or so, I was keeping on asking myself, how is this even possible? That the discourse is so different. Single biggest thing I found was that in the 21st century now, people are really looking for connection. They're really looking for affection. They're really looking for togetherness. And the impression that one is given is that it's exactly the opposite. Right? So that's one element of it. The second element of it, which to me, again, was eye-opening, and the Indian people here will understand it, that the best way to communicate with India is through the idea of tapasya. So India, you can spend years and years and years trying to speak to India with language. And the same thing can be transmitted in a week, 100 times more powerfully, just by action. So to me, what it revealed was that in politics, action is much more powerful than words. And in the 21st century, frankly, words really don't mean much, because they can be distorted. Right? So we honed into that. And I think that is also the framework of a political vision. Right? That there is a confusion these days. Confusion between power and force. Power and force are two completely different things. Right? But somehow everybody is convinced that power and force are the same thing. Power is alignment with truth. So, what Gandhiji was doing was the politics of power. He's aligned with truth, at which point you can throw as much force at him as you want. Nothing is going to happen. Right? Force is generally, it has a direction, is directed against somebody, and it is normally designed to suppress truth. So I think a good way of putting it is the politics of power, politics of truth, against the politics of violence and the politics of force.
Thank you. That's a lot, and I think a lot to take in and think with. So if I may just push you a little bit, I think many of the questions I've been hearing from my students, I teach half the year in India as well and here, and also particularly from Dalit, Bahujan young people, is they are very supportive of the direction that the Jodo Yatra is. In fact, so many of them participated. But the question that we get asked over and over again is, how will this translate into a political coalition? I think your vision is very powerful and persuasive and inviting. And I think that was what we saw in the Jodo Yatra, people from all walks of life. But I think everyone wants to know, well, how is this going to translate into a political alliance? How are we going to make this work in electoral politics?
Well, if you look at the Karnataka elections, the general sense is, oh, the Congress party fought the BJP and defeated the BJP. But what is not well understood is the mechanics that we used. And we used a completely different approach to fighting an election, a completely different approach to building a narrative, and elements of what happened in Karnataka came out of the Bharat Jodo Yatra. If you look, for example, pretty much all poor voters in Karnataka, across the board, voted for the Congress party. And one of the central elements that we are dealing with in India, and I think we're dealing with in the United States, is the massive difference between rich and poor. Few people who have almost unlimited wealth, and then millions and millions of people who are struggling. The concept of the Bharat Jodo Yatra and sort of the message of the Bharat Jodo Yatra is that poor people can mobilize. And they can mobilize very effectively and very powerfully. I said, I made the differentiation between power and force. What was really interesting to me was once we started walking, and we decided we were going to walk right from, Kanyakumari to Kashmir, the entire force of the Indian government was on us. The entire media was on us. Everybody was pushing that this thing is not going to work, it's going to fail, it's going to be a useless endeavor. Nothing they could do, no amount of force could shift this thing. And we realized that within the first 2-3 weeks, people would come to me. It's like a belief thing. People would come to me and say, "Aap kahan tak chaloge? And where will you walk to?" I said, "Look, I don't know. I have no idea where I'll walk to, but I'll go as far as I can." And by the 3rd or 4th week, they realized that, boss, ye serious kaam hai. That matlab ye ja rahe hain. And I could sense, right, that suddenly they realized, okay, this something is happening here. And once that shift took place, I could see the media guys, even the media guys sitting in the van in front of us, they couldn't transmit what they wanted to transmit. It was just physically impossible for them to do it. So, mass mobilization, particularly for an extended period of time, binds people in a way that's very, very powerful.
I think I'm very excited. I don't know about the rest of you, but firstly,
the thing is that the central most important thing is it's got to be based on truth, right? So, if for 1 second I had internally, without telling anybody, if for 1 second I had seen the Bharat Jodo Yatra as an electoral tool, it would have died right there. Simply, it would have just died on the spot, right? So, yeah.
As a youthful 50-year-old myself, how's your knee doing?
Oh no, my knee's causing me a little bit of problem.
I share your pain, and I'll share some good exercises with you later too. But I had another pressing question, which was about your fabulous white polo shirt and how you managed to stay warm in all of those. But this is not a political question, so we shall move on. But if you want to share
this is a deeply political question. Because you have to see how these things come about, right? When you're doing something like this, when you're doing something like a Bharat Jodo Yatra, you sort of, I don't want to use a strong word, but you die. Right? You become silent. And if you're doing it truthfully, you start to speak the language of what the people are speaking. Right? So it's very interesting. Again, going back to the power versus force thing. The T-shirt became an issue, right? And no matter, I mean, first they said it's some branded T-shirt. That's another story. But and then the obsession started with the T-shirt. At a certain point in the yatra, it was about 6 in the morning, and I was walking and these little kids came. 4 or 5 kids, and it was actually quite cold. And I was feeling cold too. Now people think, oh, he doesn't feel cold. That's not true. I feel cold. So I was watching these kids, and there were little kids like that, and they were shivering. They didn't have enough clothes on. So first I was like, I took a picture with them. Then I told him, listen, we need to buy them some clothes. So we got them some jackets. But then as I left them, I was thinking to myself, look, if these 6-year-old kids can be in this cold without clothes, and I am stating that I am going to try and represent them, then on what basis do I wear a sweater? Right? So I decided at that point that I am going to not wear a sweater until I can no longer do it. Until I can physically no longer do it. And then I started doing that. And then to my utter surprise, I found that I could do it all the way to Kashmir. Right? And why I'm saying that is because it was actually an expression of truth. And that's what made the T-shirt sit on top of the media screens. I kept thinking, why is this T-shirt not leaving the TV screens? Right? Why is it just sitting on the TV screen? The reason was because I had picked up on some truth. And it was transmitting.
You've opened the door to the next question that I wanted to ask. I'm a historian, and the truth worries me today, especially as we see the massive social engineering that is happening in India in particular. And, I can just think about all of these UPA Congress government schemes like the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, the Forest Rights Act, the Right to Information Act. All of these things are being rescinded. As scholars and academics and as people who care about the past and future of India, every day we are seeing history rewritten. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about, how, in terms of policy reforms, and we can take Karnataka as an example. It's a state I'm very familiar with, the anti-hijab ban, or there are lots of repressive measures in place. So how do you see your government, your alliance, if we imagine that to be the democratic future, how do you see yourselves addressing these questions in terms of policy practices? Because the engineering is thorough, and you've talked about this yourself on many occasions.
India is like a huge ocean, right? And all oceans will have turbulence in them. Storms will come. They have to come, right? And what's important when a storm comes is how you react to the storm, right? I think one way of looking at this thing is, this is a huge disaster and it's the end of the road. That's a pessimistic way of looking at it. I think the correct way of looking at it is India is facing a storm. The storm is going to pass. Let us face the storm bravely and effectively, and let us make sure that when the storm passes, we have a new India, a forward-looking India in place. For 1 minute, I don't believe that the BJP cannot be defeated. For 1 minute. Right? And I, as a political actor, can see their vulnerabilities, right? It's difficult for a lot of people to see them because of the media pressure, the money, all that. But I can see it. As a political entrepreneur, I can clearly see that there are huge vulnerabilities to the BJP. And the BJP can be demolished in an election if the opposition is aligned properly. It's not even a question. Yeah. And the central weakness of the BJP is the tremendous amount of inequality and pain they're causing in India. And the pain and inequality they're causing in particular to the weak people. And it's across the board. It's tribals, it's Dalits, it's minorities, it's poor people, it's farmers, it's small and medium businesses. So it's like across the board they're causing pain. And they're going to get a reaction.
Thank you.
So for me, what's interesting is not only defeating the BJP, but what's interesting is what is the alignment that can come after the BJP? And what does that look like? And how does that make the negotiation in India between our communities more effective? How do we improve the relationship between Indian people? And as I said, the core of it, you said it's very complicated. It's not complicated. It's very simple. How do we नफरत के बाजार में मोहब्बत की दुकान कैसे खोलते हैं?
लेकिन मोहब्बत का माहौल कैसे लाते हैं? दुकान, I think what we are asking is also, I think the vision question is about mahal and rather than just a state. And I think you've given us enough,
love
ideas
is,
to think about.
Most people think love is a feeling. Love is not a feeling, love is an action.
You've just broken a lot of hearts.
No, that's true. Love is an action that generates a feeling.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not a feeling. So if you act lovingly, the other person doesn't have a choice. Really, the other person doesn't have a choice. Right? He is almost forced to say, Bhaiya.
Mohabbat ho gayi.
So in the yatra, one RSS guy came with a long face, sat down, he walked next to me, he said, "Aap yahan kyun aaye ho?" And I said, "Main to aapse pyar karta hu. Aapse milne aaya hu." He couldn't help smiling. Right? So this is a very powerful force. It's an Indian idea.
On the theme of love and mohabbat, I'm queer, I'm Bahujan, so the question of sexuality is very central to many of my kin in India, and you and your comrades have been very vocal about your support for the LGBTQI community, but been quite silent on the same-sex marriage issue, which is currently in the Supreme Court. And for many of us, it's less about marriage. It's about rights and representations. I want my children to be able to inherit property. I want my partner. So again, this is not about taking a stance. I'm more interested in how you think about the equity of love across communities and collectivities, because it matters, and young people don't care anymore. I am home so much, and when I talk to young college people, they want a better life. They don't care who you love, they don't care who you are part of, they want to have better lives. So
in my opinion, who you love, how you love them, is your problem, is your decision. It's none of my business.
Hopefully my privilege, not a problem.
Privilege, your privilege, your decision, not my business. But where it becomes my business is if you start spreading hatred. There I can have an opinion and say, look, I don't agree with this. But as long as you're being affectionate, it's your view. Of course, if things are in the Supreme Court, we have to be careful what we say. We have to temper what we're saying about them.
Which is why I will move forward now. And I appreciate mohabbat, dukaan, mahal, bazaar, whatever.
Supermarket.
I'm a bit of an anti-capitalist, so I don't think we can.
Somebody says mall. I said, I don't know about that.
Mahal.
No,
but it could be my hall, But before we run out of time, I do want to hit a few more pressing questions if I could. I think we've all been sort of taken by the distinction you are making between the politics of love, coalition, invitation, versus the politics of hatred, division, and other kinds of difference. But there are some continuities. As historians, we don't like to say similarities, we like to say continuities between the past and the present. And of course, you ended your yatra in Kashmir. And as you know, our erstwhile head of state, who will remain unnamed, has also scheduled the G20, as you know, in Kashmir to foreground the security of the state. Now, there are many Kashmiris in the diaspora here who want to know how, given the continuities between the UPA, Congress, and the current government, where the militarization of Kashmir and the kind of life challenges that Kashmiris continue to face, what would you say to them? How would you invite them into this vision, especially given what happened in August 2019?
I mean, during the UPA, I did a lot of work in Kashmir, a lot of it in the background, Panchayati Raj elections, helping Kashmiri youngsters, with jobs, both in Kashmir and in Maharashtra, Bombay, Karnataka, and stuff like that. And the response that we were getting and the affection, two-way affection that was being generated really surprised me. And then in 2014, it was just completely dismantled. We believe that everybody in India, regardless of who they are, whichever part of society they come from, they should have a voice. That voice should be respected, should be listened to, should be appreciated. And I think that voice is an asset. And that's how we think about it. Not just for Kashmir, but for all parts of India. I mean, for example, what is going on in Manipur right now?
Quite.
It's a huge tragedy. So our idea is that let the voices be heard. Right? Let's have the conversation. There might be hard conversations. I might disagree with you on many things. You can tell me you don't agree with me. I don't agree with you. That doesn't mean we should stop talking. That doesn't mean that we can't have a shared imagination.
Thank you. I'll ask you one more question before we open it up. Just a reminder, you have little cards in front of you. Please pass them to our staff who are standing, and they will bring them to me. But I have one question before I turn it over to the audience. And this question is very relevant for all of us who are gathered here. We are gathered here, in my opinion, at a moment of enormous transition. You are offering us hope. I like the fact that you said the defeat of the BJP is not beyond the imagination. It is a matter of imagination. And I am hugely grateful for you for giving us that. But I'd like to hear more about what you think those of us who are in the diaspora do and can do. And as we move forward towards supporting this new democratic future, I say this particular because, again, in the past, since the Nehruvian project, since then, there has been a lot of support in the diaspora. But in the past couple of decades, the kind of organizational infrastructure of the Congress and its alliances in the diaspora has sort of dissipated. In a way, I think that's a tragedy. So we're interested in thinking about how we can support you. As you know, our research has shown us that the campaign of the BJP is supported quite substantially and financially by members of the Indian diaspora that live both in the UK and the United States. So these are material factors. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about what can we do? How can we galvanize? What do you want us to be thinking about? We are with you with the love. Now give us some action plan.
I mean, express what India actually is. Express what our philosophy is, what our history is. Because a lot of the times what the BJP does is it completely distorts what India is. If you look at Indian history, look at Indian philosophy, we prize humility, for example, right? All our great leaders tended towards humility, and you can look at Buddha, you can look at Mahatma Gandhi, you can look at Guru Nanak, you can look at all these great people. The essence of what they were doing was mohabbat and humility. Where is the mohabbat and humility in the RSS and the BJP? Right? They know everything, they understand everything. Right? So expressing that, and I think the most important thing, which I find very powerful and a lot of fun, is don't respond to their hatred with hatred. Yeah. It frustrates, the living daylights out of them. They completely go crazy. So it's even nice because you're like, okay, it's so easy to get you going, right? So don't respond to their nastiness and their cruelty with cruelty and nastiness. You will never be able to defeat them. Every time they, abuse you, say thank you very much, give me some more. I'm okay. I can take whatever you give me. And we learn from it.
Well, to your words and our futures. I want to turn it over to the audience, but before I do, I want to just ask one of our trustees, Dr. Anuradha Luther Maitra, who of course many of you here know. She's a gifted teacher, entrepreneur, exemplary in so many ways that I don't have time to describe, and a special advisor also to our campus, and part of many, many wonderful initiatives around social justice. So Anu, I'm going to invite you to ask Mr. Gandhi a question before we turn it over to the audience.
Actually, apparently I'm going to be, I learned a new word which is fluffered. I have to fill in some time while Anjali.
But that's a pornographic word, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. You did not tell me that, Anjali.
I haven't heard that word before.
I'm a historian of sexuality, so...
My apologies.
No, Jai Bhim, Jai Hind, so...
But, taking on. Well, firstly,
Would you prefer to sit down?
No, this is fine. Thank you, Anjali, for that introduction to me. You make me seem like I have a multiple personality disorder, but somehow I seem to think it's a good thing. But today you're going to see perhaps one or two of my personalities. But I do want to, before I sort of welcome Mr. Gandhi, I'd like to introduce the three trustees who have been instrumental here in making this happen. Kamil Hassan, who's sitting right there, and Kiran Malhotra there, and the university, and then my husband, Thomas Kailath, right there. Now, introducing Tom tells me that actually the university got a great deal because they got two furs, which is two for the price of one. Kamil came with his wife, Talat, and she works as hard as he does on university issues. And Kamil and Kiran is here with Arjun Malhotra, her husband. So we're very grateful to all of you. Thank you very much. But our group's involvement with the university's South Asia programs actually started almost 25 years ago when my late husband, Siddharth Maitra, spearheaded a drive to actually provide an endowment for Indian classical music. And the idea there was that the natural sort of, the natural appeal of the genre would actually be such that it would appeal to the best in us. And it would elevate, it would unite. And the second thing that we wanted was, of course, that our interest in South Asia programs should somehow get institutionalized. And so here today, we have the Center for South Asia Studies with its singular focus, and I think quite market differentiatedly so, with its singular focus on justice. So thank you very much. And talking of morphing, I see this particular event as the channeling of an ancient Greek agora, which was this open market, but also an open space to have the kind of conversations that we are having today, starting in Silicon Valley for CSAS with this most eminent speaker, Mr. Gandhi, And so from all of us here, welcome, Mr. Gandhi. Now I'm going to immediately actually put on my second hat. And as we were walking in, Mr. Gandhi asked me a question which I didn't quite have the time to respond to. He says, who are you? When did you come here? Where are you from? So anyway, now you know I'm Anu Maitra. I'm actually Anuradha Luther Maitra. And I came here about 50 years ago from the Delhi School of Economics, a student of Manmohan Singh, Amartya Sen, Shukhabhai Chakravarti, and from the Planning Commission, where I worked with Shukhabhai Chakravarti, and I came to Stanford to get my PhD, so I'm an economist. And so I've been here almost 50 years, or perhaps more, but I've always had one eye trained on India. And so today, I'll put on the other hat right now and ask you my question as an economist. So there have been many ups and downs, and there is much to cheer. But when I take stock today, there are two miserable, and they're linked, two miserable things that stand out. One is the unemployment deficit. By reasonable estimates, I think that deficit is about 100 million jobs today, and at the rate of about 7 million jobs a year, it's probably going to be closer to 150 million jobs in the next decade. And the second thing is, and of course, I'm a student of Amartya and Shukhabhai, the woefully inadequate investment by every post-independent government, and I'm including, I would say, the Congress, on the education and health of its people. And this, whether you look at the percentage of GDP that is spent on it, or whether you look at the quality of the education that's provided, that's definitely true. And it's in strong contrast to every other Asian country that has really remarkably progressed, and you know, I can name them, but you know them all. So it's not an easy problem to solve. I'm coming to my question, Anjali. It takes time and discipline. It's not as glamorous as capital-intensive projects or investments in infrastructure, which is what is happening now. It does not benefit the capitalists who contribute handsomely to political campaigns. Ironically, therefore, the very...
Actually, these days they don't, at least to us.
Yeah, now we have the bonds.
Now
we have the bonds.
they're just contributing to one campaign.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And through the bonds, which are not very transparent, they were meant to be, but anyway, the way I see it, ironically, the very democratic institutions with elections every few years that we are defending today impose short-run, glamorous, charisma-making considerations on any government in power. So my question to you is, what would you do differently, and what can you do differently?
This is rapid fire. You have 30 seconds. Go.
No, I think that would require a long answer. I'll be quick.
Okay.
Unemployment is now a crisis, and it's going to become, it's going out of control, right? And huge part of that unemployment is because of the way the BJP regime is concentrating wealth and power. Okay, and they're wiping out the backbone of the Indian small and medium businesses. That's one element. The second, and I think central problem, is that in India we do not respect skills. So we disrespect skills, and I think that is something that, if we want to start getting employment going, we have to start respecting the person who is skillful and is doing the actual building, the actual job. I'll give you a few examples. So there are clusters all across India, right, which have tremendous amounts of skill. I was in the Bharat Jodo Yatra, I walked through Bellary, as an example. Not many of you would know that Bellary is the jeans capital of India, right? So most jeans that are being made in India are made out of Bellary. 4 lakh people were unemployed in Bellary over the last 3-4 years, right? 4 lakh people used to be employed, now 40,000 people are employed. 3.5 lakh got unemployed. Why? Because we are not focusing capital and linking it with skills. There is a disconnect between where the skill cluster is and where our capital is going. So one thing that we would think about is how do we link capital flows to the clusters of skill in India. Bellary is an example. Moradabad, Kanpur, pretty much every district has some skill or the other, and our capital structure just completely ignores them. So making that connection is very important. Education, I think much more public expenditure on both education and healthcare is required. But I think I'm one of the people who thinks that even the way we teach and what we teach doesn't make sense. It's the way we teach. We don't let our children question. We make them memorize things. We force them to ratto things. I think modern economy, you can't do that. And these unfortunately are cultural things, right? These are deeply embedded in our culture, and they hint at questions of caste, questions of community. So you have to challenge some of these ideas more aggressively, more centrally.
Thank you, Anu, for that wonderful question. And Mr. Gandhi for your thoughtful response. You should really be an academic in case you want to have multiple careers.
I said as a political entrepreneur, but I've got many other.
Dasha Avatar.
Yeah, I think people like to categorize. He's a politician, he's a actor, but I don't think people fit quite like that.
Touche. Thank you. So I thank you all for your questions, which are all wonderful. In my limited skill as moderator, I will combine a lot of questions. If you put your name down and you feel comfortable asking it and your question is called, I would invite you to ask so Mr. Gandhi can see and engage with you in person. Let me begin with the first question, which Mr. Kamil Hassan, if you feel comfortable asking. Yeah, sure. Can someone pass the mic to
Mr. Gandhi, my question is about the 2024 general election. Considering that in the last general election, BJP got 37% of the popular vote, and considering that now you have so much momentum with the Bharat Jodo Yatra and with victory in Karnataka, and hopefully in Rajasthan and MP and upcoming elections, if the opposition unites and they form a coalition against BJP, the chances of winning are very high. So, I know that there's some movement in that direction, but my question is, what do you think are the chances of such a coalition actually happening? And are you going to work to ensure that such coalition forms? And my last question is, if such a coalition forms, are you willing to step back and have someone else take the leadership of this coalition and maybe have someone else become the Prime Minister, if necessary, in the best interest of the country?
Well, the last question, of course, that's something that the Congress President decides. That's not something I decide. That's for the Congress President to decide who represents the Congress Party. On the matter of opposition unity, yes, we are working towards it, and it is coming along very nicely. But I think in order to defeat the BJP, you need more than just opposition unity. Just opposition unity, in my opinion, is not going to be enough to do the job. I think you need an alternative vision to the BJP, right? And Bharat Jodo Yatra was the first step in proposing such a vision. And it's a vision that all opposition parties are aligned with. No opposition party would disagree with the idea of the Bharat Jodo Yatra. So I think bringing the opposition together is important, but also aligning the opposition and making the people of India understand that there is not just a group of opposition parties that have combined, but a proposed way forward for the country. And we're working on those things.
Thank you. The next question I have is from Nidhi Mahajan.
Thank you so much. So in Gujarat, a group of Muslim fishermen have petitioned the court for mass euthanasia because they're unable to make a livelihood. There have been similar issues of economic boycotts of Muslim vendors in Delhi as well as in UP. Of course, all of these issues have exacerbated under the BJP and RSS, but these are not new issues for lower caste and lower caste Muslims. So how do you concretely plan to address these economic as well as deeply sort of fractured social issues for lower class and lower caste Muslims specifically?
I mean, it's people from all communities face these problems. So yes, Muslims face them, tribals face them, Dalits face them. In our last manifesto, we had the idea of a floor, an economic floor, which is the idea of nyay, right? A minimum income to every Indian. I think that's quite a powerful idea. We've rejigged it slightly in Karnataka, and we've renamed it, repositioned it, and so we are providing a similar floor to the people of Karnataka. So that is one idea that I think is very powerful. The other thing, of course, is things like Manrega, supporting architecture, both in the rural and urban area. There are a lot of ideas we have to provide a floor below which people can't fall, and I think that's one element of it. Of course, you have to figure out the other side, which is what the lady was talking about: employment, production, economic growth, so you can finance that.
Thank you. I think there are several questions on similar topics, so I'm trying to just bring them together because we have limited time. So the one theme that's come up at least in 10 questions is around the Constitution. And I'm thinking back to the chant that went viral during the CAA protests, "Sam kagaz nahi dikhayenge, samvidhan ko bachayenge." So the question that a lot of people are asking is, given what we are seeing with what is happening with the Constitution, and you yourself have spoken eloquently on the subject, people are very curious to hear what your thoughts are on the crisis of the Constitution that we are facing currently. This is coming for over 10 people here.
I mean, there's a direct attack on the Constitution, right? That's obvious to everybody. And then there's an indirect attack on the Constitution, right? Which is the attack on the institutional framework. I mean, if the institutions that protect the Constitution are all captured, then the Constitution is just a piece of paper, right? So both those are taking place. But the good news is that there is a huge counter-reaction to it. And people are very, very sensitive to what is going on, and they understand it. Look, there is a sort of huge media capture, right? So the voices of a lot of people are just simply not heard. But that doesn't mean that those voices are not there and that those voices don't count. We defeated the BJP in Karnataka. The amount of money they spent versus the amount of money we spent is maybe 10:1 ratio. We defeated them, right? No matter how much money they threw, at a certain point it didn't work, right? So, as I said earlier, politics of power will trump the politics of force, right? Politics of truth will trump the politics of money. It might take time, but it will happen. India cannot afford the Constitution to be destroyed. India's entire negotiation is based on the Constitution. So an attack on the Constitution is an attack on the idea of India. And if you destroy the Constitution, you destroy India.
That's,
And by the way, that's what the BJP is trying to do.
I think there is no doubt, yes. Given that we are on the Constitution, we have several members of the Ambedkar King Circle Study Group here, and a couple of them, if one of you wants to ask your question, Prasanna is here, or Ganpati. If not, I will ask your question for you. If you are here, please ask your question, and, please keep it brief. We would like to engage more people.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Would you mind me to ask the same question that I
Yes,
asked in
please,
here?
yes.
Okay. The question that I asked was regarding the caste consensus. The last caste consensus was
Consensus.
done
We wish it was a consensus, but nahi hoga bhai.
and it was done in 1931.
Caste consensus is called the Constitution.
Yeah.
यार आप शायरी बना रहे हो अभी आगे बढ़ते हैं चलो.
So the census was done in 1931. Those are the numbers that we have been using for a long time. Any hurdles that you see in doing so? The question I ask is because all of the development schemes that the government comes with goes with respect to those numbers, like the proportions are going with regards to those numbers. So what are the hurdles that you see to do it in current state is the big question.
It's already done. The caste census was already done by the UPA, and the data is already available to the government. The government is refusing to release it. So there are no hurdles in getting it done. The hurdle is that the BJP doesn't want to release it. We also didn't release it, which I think was a mistake, because we internally were having a conversation about it, and the elections came, and then we went into that spiral. But we are committed to releasing it, and we are also committing to putting pressure on the BJP to release the data that is already with the government of India. They are toying around with the idea of not releasing the last one and releasing the next one, but that will be a couple of years from now. So we want them to release the last census.
Would you happen to share when was that done last?
2011.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I have skimmed through 2004 to 2023, the documents of Ministry of Self-Empowerment and Justice. Everyone keeps on referring to 1931's data, and so that's where the question is coming
Yeah,
from.
because the last caste census that was done was in 31.
Yeah.
But 2011 has been done and the data is available. The government is trying to say that the data was collected erroneously, which we don't agree with. And we believe they're just making excuses for it, and they don't want to release it. But we are committed fully to releasing that. And we're going to put pressure on the BJP and force them to do it.
Thank you.
So I think what you're saying is there is a precedent already been set by previous coalitions like yours for a caste census, which the BJP is refusing to acknowledge in its refusal.
No,
to...
the caste census is already done.
I'm corroborating
Yeah.
for our young friend there that there is data, but the reason why the data is not being negotiated is not politically profitable for the BJP.
Yeah.
There are several questions around the idea of secularism. And the questions navigate multiple pieces of the question. I'll try to put them together. So the question is, how do you think about secularism within the Indian context? And we know secularism means very different things in different parts of the world. Is it a separation of church, temple, mosque, and state? Or is it a tolerance of multiple religions? How do you see it? Because a lot of people see the current crisis as linked to the demise of Indian secularism as well.
I think everybody should have the right to practice whatever religion they want. And it is their choice, and as you said earlier, it's their privilege. And everybody should be allowed that. I don't think one should impose, religion on anybody. It's a personal choice.
So you agree that there should be a separation between religion and state? I think that was the question. I don't mean to put you in a corner, but I think people
No.
want a clarification on that. Because that's the nuance around which so much politics hinges right now.
I mean, in India, it's very difficult to separate religion and politics, right? You're supposed to separate religion and politics, but it's impossible to separate it, right? So I feel it's embedded everywhere in India, right? I think the state should sort of, I don't think this, of course the state should be religious, right? The state should act in the interest of everybody neutrally. But I think in India, at least in the politics, I mean, you're not supposed to use religious figures in Indian elections. They're everywhere, right? Yeah, they're all over the place. They're everywhere. So one can say that that's how it should be, but that's just not how it plays out.
Fair enough. I think that's astutely answered. The other question that has come up again, which I find very intriguing, actually, I would love to know your thoughts, and I'm going to read it. Is Shri Daya here? You can ask your question yourself if you are. Sorry, I mispronounced your name. Please.
Yeah, I'll try to paraphrase. I was just curious to understand what your sense of how you see the youth in India now, in terms of, do you see them more progressive than the previous generation, or because of what has been happening the last, 5+ years, it's actually regressive? And if so, you have any thoughts on what could be done?
In the walk in the Bharat Chodo Yatra, I asked pretty much every child I met what they wanted to do. And I must have spoken to thousands of children, all ages, 5, 6, 10, 15, 18, 20 years old. And I only got 5 answers, right? I didn't get 6, I got 5 answers. Engineer, doctor,
Historian.
bad luck, not a single person, 0, right? Lawyer, doctor, engineer, army or paramilitary, or then IAS or government, right? Now, and then I would ask them, so do you want to do this, or do your parents want you to do this? And most of them would keep quiet, and then they'd say, our parents want us to do this. And at a certain point, I met these 20 girls in a sort of group, and I started asking them this. And they said the same thing, the 5 answers. And I said, look, I want to test this idea. I don't believe it. So I said, how many of you want to become pilots? So none of them said they want to become pilots. So I said, okay. And then one of the guys who was with us was a helicopter pilot. So I told him, can you do me a favor? Can you take 3 or 4 of these girls in your helicopter for a little circuit? And so he took them for a little circuit. And then after that, I asked them, so what do you want to do? And they said, we want to be pilots. Right? So the point is, we're not giving our children opportunity. Right? It's not a question of are they regressive or are they progressive. They are what opportunities they have. Right? If you tell them that the only thing you can aspire to is these 5 things, right? Then
Sorry,
that's...
I have to clarify. When I don't mean in terms of regressive, in terms of ideas. For example, my concern is if I started going to school like in 2014, I'm a 10-year-old, all that I'm exposed to now I'm, 20, is what has been changed in textbooks or what the media tells me. The whole idea of I grew up in India with a different idea of India than what the generation now is growing up with, right? So that's what I meant regressive, not in terms of the profession.
No, but it's connected, right? Because if you have a set of children who aspire to an extremely limited set of things, right? Then they're not going to be thinking about, they're not going to be thinking expansively. They're not going to have an open mind. They're going to say, okay, I got to be an engineer, and that's all I'm going to do. Then I ask these kids, listen, how many of you actually think you're going to be engineers? And then they go silent. I asked a girl who told me I want to join the IAS. I said, listen, tell me, how many kids do you think join the IAS every year? And she says, 3 lakhs. And when I told her 300, she started to cry. Right? So the point is, if you give kids opportunity, right, by definition, they will be progressive. If you don't give them opportunity, if you don't give them hope, they will be regressive. And then you can feed them anything you want. Right? So I think the problem is that we are not allowing our kids to imagine. One child told me he wants to be a mechanic. And one girl told me she wants to start a business. Everybody else was these 5 things. Right? So that gives you a state of what they're thinking. And if they're thinking in that way, then to feed them anything you want is easy. Right? But if they're thinking in an expansive way, and you try to feed them something, they'll say, what about this? What about that?
If we may just impose on you and end with just 2 small questions. I know you're
Your concern, by the way, about the sort of distortion of history and the way the value system of, India, the negotiation, the conversation in India is being sort of disturbed, disrupted. If that's having an effect on the kids, it absolutely is.
Yeah, and I think we opened with that as well, right? I mean, the kind of history, unfolding, WhatsApp University, as we refer to it in shorthand, right? I want to, if I may, just last 2 questions from the audience. And I mentioned this in the beginning, and it has come up in several questions. And I had the pleasure of listening to several of your interviews as I was preparing. And I was very taken by a comment that you made, that one of the kind of refrains that came up for you, that you heard from the people you talked to in the Jodo Yatra, was violence against women. You mentioned it as one of the points, in addition to unemployment, corruption. And one of the many questions we've had is around the escalation of sexual violence against women. And of course, we are seeing that unfold today outside the Parliament House from Jantar Mantar, as we see our champions, our female Olympic wrestlers, asking for rights and restitution, and their cries are being ignored. So I think the question that is coming from many people in the audience is, how can women, particularly women in positions of precarity, feel safe, and what can we do about it? I mean, Nirbhaya was not that long ago, right? So there have been so many spectacular cases of violence, but as those of us who study in caste and sexuality, there is one Dalit woman who is either raped or murdered every single day. That is a very, very grim statistic, which has not changed.
One who's raped, murdered.
Yeah, there is a victim of sexual violence or domestic violence, right? So again, this is less of what is wrong and more, this is where we are. What is your sort of thought on these questions?
I find it absolutely shocking. I don't understand why the government is just not taking action on that fellow. It just doesn't make sense to me. On the wrestlers. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. But I think across India, north to south, this was an issue.
Quite.
And it's a huge issue. And it's kept under wraps. People don't like to discuss it. But I think these issues need to be discussed, because there's a lot of pain and a lot of tragedy behind all this. So it's sort of it's a secret, I would say. People don't like to discuss, and people say no. But I heard it across the country. I think opening spaces for women. In the political sphere, in the business sphere, and not accepting this type of violence. Not having tolerance for it, I think is very important.
I was just going to say the person who they are calling out remains in Parliament, and here you are, right? So the irony of that remains very obvious to all of us. We are unfortunately out of time, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to give us some rousing words of mohabbat, of mahal, of zindagi as we leave, so that you have given us a small sliver of inspiration, and I want to give you a chance to end with any thoughts you may have for all of your, of all of our community here.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, thank you for coming. I was
Mention not.
mentioned not. I was quite excited to come here. I like coming to the United States. Nice California, nice discussions happen here, open discussions happen here. People generally tend to be open-minded, at least the people who I get to speak to. I think a lot of these things, affection, being kind, being gentle to people, we always talk about them at the nation-state level. Oh, in India there's violence, in India there's anger, in India there's hatred. But I think you can't get it at the national level unless you live it personally, right? So a lot of this eventually translates into how you treat people around you, right? And that magnifies. And I think that is something that is underrated. So I think how you respond to people in everyday life, when they're kind to you or when they're nasty to you, I think that's very important. It's very empowering. I've found in my life that no matter what someone says to you, responding to them kindly is a choice. It's not a very difficult choice. Huh? Yeah, it's ahimsa, you can say, but say I'll give you a personal example of mine. My father was killed, and for many years I was sort of carrying around with me anger that oh, these people killed my father, and then once fine day I just realized, wait a minute, why am I doing that? Why am I carrying this anger around with me everywhere? My father's not here. My father's not coming back, right? So why am I doing this? And then I just put literally I put the anger down like this. And that was the end of that. And then I started to see it in a completely different way. I started to see the violence very differently than I saw it before that. So everybody has violence done to them. That's nature of life. But I mean, it's happening to you all the time, for example. How you react to it, I think is very important as individuals. And then if enough of us react to it properly, it translates. So that would be what I would leave you with.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gandhi, for your time, your generosity, your provocations, everybody. Mr. Gandhi.
Thank you.